Hi guys. Tonight we ease back through the coal-tinged haze of 19th century Britain, and you find yourself waking in a room that is smaller, darker and far draftier than anything you would tolerate today. The ceiling slopes down at an odd angle. The plaster has a hairline crack that looks suspiciously larger each time you glance at it. A single window is glazed with condensation and soot from the street below. You breathe in, and the air smells like cooled fireplace ash mixed with damp wool. Victorian mornings do not care about your comfort, and if the cold does not get you, the questionable hygiene might. You probably will not survive this, at least not without a very sturdy immune system. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your location and local time in the comments, because I love imagining where you are drifting off from. Now dim the lights and let the day begin around you, quiet at first like a kettle just starting to murmur on a distant stove. You lie on a lumpy straw mattress that prickles through thin sheets. The blanket is coarse but warm, smelling faintly of old smoke, as if someone once dried it too close to the hearth. You wiggle your toes and feel the chill radiating up from bare floorboards. These planks never really warm up even in summer. A faint rattle comes from the window frame when a cart rolls by outside. The sound vibrates through the walls as though the entire house is breathing in shallow, creaking sighs. You sit up slowly. The room around you is cramped, barely large enough for the bed, a tiny washstand and a cracked ceramic pitcher of water. The water is icy. You splash a little on your face anyway, gasping at the temperature shock. Victorians claim cold water wakes the spirit. You suspect it mainly causes early onset grumpiness. Still, this small ritual is ordinary here. A mainstream fact, most urban Victorian households did not have running water, so pitchers and basins were daily necessities. The water might have travelled through miles of questionable pipes, or been pumped in from a street hydrant shared by dozens of families. You dab yourself clean with a linen rag that really wants to retire from service. It has seen too much. As you move around the room, you notice a faint humming sound coming from the street. It is not electricity, not yet. It is the city itself stirring, the soft clop of hooves on cobblestones, the distant clash of shop shutters, a vendor calling out the first morning bargains. You gently open your window just an inch and inhale the cool fog rolling between narrow buildings. It carries soot from factory chimneys, the tang of horse manure, and a surprising sweetness from a nearby bakery already making bread. You wonder how anyone adjusted to this odd perfume of city life. Then again, historians still argue whether urban air pollution felt as oppressive to Victorians as it does to you, or whether long familiarity dulled their senses. You tug on your clothes layer by layer because insulation is more of a hope than a reality. Your shirt is stiff from being washed in harsh lye soap, and your wool trousers itch slightly. A good reminder that soft textiles for everyday wear are a privilege of later times. You wrap a scarf around your neck, the kind woven by hand in a pattern that does not quite match anything else you own. It holds the faint smell of someone else's pipe smoke drifting in from last night's street corners. As you dress, you glance at a small object on the washstand tucked behind the pitcher. It is a strange little curiosity, a tin containing Victorian tooth powder, gritty and chalk-coloured. The quirk here is that many people in this era sprinkled charcoal or ground cuttlefish bone into their tooth-cleaning mixtures. You try a bit on your fingertip and instantly regret it. The taste is like licking the inside of an old fireplace, but your teeth do feel slightly polished afterward. Progress right, your stomach growls. Breakfast is waiting, though not here in this room. You step into the narrow hallway, each floorboard creaking as if warning anyone within hearing distance that you are awake. The house feels layered with lives stacked on top of one another. A baby fusses behind one door. Someone coughs with a hollow rattling sound behind another. Tuberculosis is still a threat in this time, and although no one says it out loud, you feel the tension in the walls. You reach the staircase and descend slowly, gripping the wooden railing that has been touched by thousands of hands. It is polished smooth, not by design, but by human repetition. Downstairs, the small communal kitchen glows with the faintest orange light, where a coal fire is struggling into life. Someone must have come down before you to coax the embers awake. The air is thick with yesterday's smoke clinging stubbornly to the ceiling beams. A kettle sits on a trivet, its metal belly darkened with soot. It sighs gently, not quite boiling yet. Someone left a loaf of hard bread on the table and you run your fingers across its surface. The crust is rock solid. You suspect that if you dropped it from the second floor, it would leave a dent in the cobblestones. But this is ordinary here. Most families rely on dense, simple bread, and maybe a scrape of butter or jam for the morning meal. Later in wealthier houses, breakfast spreads become almost comedic displays of abundance. For now, you work with what you have. You slice off a piece and hold it near the fire to soften it. A few crumbs fall into the ashes. You sip a weak tea barely more than tinted water, but warm enough to chase away the worst of the chill. This combination might not impress your modern palate, but it fuels the city. If you close your eyes, you can imagine thousands of homes just like this one each, with someone quietly chewing their morning rations and preparing for hours of labour, or study, or caretaking. You look around the tiny kitchen and notice the mismatched plates, the faded checkered cloth, the thin layer of soot on everything no matter how often it is scrubbed. This is the price of burning coal from dawn to dusk. Yet there is something comforting in the familiarity of these routines. You wrap your fingers around your tin cup and let the warmth settle into your palms. Outside, the street noise grows louder. A market wagon rattles past. A milk seller calls out in a sing-song voice. Somewhere nearby, a church bell begins to toll, marking an hour that feels older than the stones beneath your feet. You finish the last of your bread and tea, then stand and stretch, feeling the stiffness in your shoulders ease just enough to move on. You step back into the hallway and for a moment you pause at the front door. The cool handle waits under your palm. When you pull it open, the air swirls around you sharp and lively, full of possibility and grime in equal measure. Victorian life does not waste time. It pulls you forward, nudging you into the flow of the city's morning pulse. You take a breath and step into the street, the coal fog curling at your ankles like an impatient cat, urging you toward the world waiting beyond the threshold. You move into the street, slowly letting the morning settle around you like a cloak woven from fog clatter and human momentum. The first thing you notice is the rhythm under your feet. The city wakes with a soundscape that feels almost musical, if your definition of music includes horse hooves, iron wheels, and street vendors shouting prices that magically rise whenever they see you lingering too long. You walk carefully because the cobblestones are slick from last night's mist. Your boots slide a little, the leather still stiff from yesterday's damp. The air is thick enough to taste tinged with soot from chimney pots, exhaling steady streams of grey. You pass a row of narrow brick houses that lean toward one another like old gossiping relatives. Windows glimmer faintly with the reflection of gas lamps that are still being turned off by lamplighters finishing their long shifts. A mainstream fact drifts through your mind as a carriage rattles by. In the mid-19th century London alone stabled more than 300,000 horses. You already feel like you have met at least half of them this morning, judging by the manure dotting your path like some unpleasant Victorian obstacle course. You sidestep, carefully thanking your luck that you wore shoes you do not particularly like. A coachman steers past you, cracking his whip in the air for theatrical flair rather than necessity. You catch a glimpse of a passenger behind the cloudy window. A pair of neatly gloved hands rests on a lap and hat feather bobs with each jolt of the wheels. Middle-class commuters enjoy the illusion of smooth travel, but you know the truth. Every ride is a battle between wheels and uneven stone. You hear a muffled groan as the carriage hits another rut. Even privilege cannot soften the road. You follow a delivery boy who rushes by with a tray of rolls wrapped in cloth. Steam curls from the basket. The smell is heavenly warm dough mixed with yeast and the faint sweetness of honey glaze. You want to ask where he is taking them, but his pace suggests he might simply vanish if you blink. A sudden clang makes you jump. A metal bucket has tipped over at the edge of an alley, startling a black cat that shoots between your legs like an arrow. A woman sweeping her stoop shakes her head at you with the kind of knowing smile that says, "This happens every day and you should really learn to watch your step." A quirky tidbit pops into your mind as you continue walking. Some early Victorian street sweepers use stale beer mixed with sand to tamp down dust on the road. You glance at the ground in front of a shop and wonder if that patch of suspiciously dark gravel is the result of last night's unfinished ale. The thought makes you grin even as a carriage wheel splashes a grimy droplet near your ankle. You pretend not to notice. It is far too early for despair. You pause at a corner where the street opens into a wider thoroughfare. The noise grows louder here. Vendors call out their stock, each trying to outshout the next. A young fishmonger raises a silver-scaled herring in one hand, proudly announcing that it was caught at dawn, which may or may not be true, depending on your definition of dawn and honesty. A flower girl arranges wilting blossoms into small bouquets, hoping to charm passers-by with the promise of a little colour. You buy a single violet because it feels like a small kindness to someone working so hard with so little. A tram trundles past sparks flickering from its rails. The conductor leans out and rings a bell that sounds more like a broken cowbell than an official public transport device. You feel a jolt as the car screeches to a halt to let passengers board. Victorians are still figuring out transportation systems, and it shows. Historians still argue whether these early trams improved city life or simply added yet another layer of danger to already chaotic streets. You follow the road as it slopes gently downward. The fog begins to lift slightly, revealing the silhouettes of taller buildings. Shopkeepers pull up shutters with creaking metal groans. A baker flips a chalk sign, writing out the day's offerings in flour-smudged script. A tailor sweeps lint from his doorway with a meticulous rhythm, his bristles never quite catching all the stray threads. You admire his determination. Perfection is a myth, but Victorians chase it anyway. You cross paths with a lamplighter, finishing his final extinguishing rounds. He carries a long pole with a hook at one end and smells faintly of oil and smoke. He nods politely, his eyes tired yet bright. You imagine the quiet solitude of his nightly work moving from post to post under dark skies. He must know every twist and corner of these streets better than anyone alive. You continue on, and notice how unevenly the morning unfolds depending on the neighbourhood. In front of a grand townhouse, a groom brushes a gleaming chestnut horse until its coat shines like polished copper. A polished carriage waits nearby, its brass fittings glinting as the last of the fog thins. Across the street, a row of cramped tenements leans together laundry lines, stretching from window to window like sagging bunting. A woman leans out wringing water from a shirt with practiced efficiency. You see two children chasing each other around a water pump, their laughter echoing off the brick. The contrast hits you sharply. Wealth lives right beside poverty, separated not by distance, but by the thickness of a wall and the weight of opportunity. You take this in quietly, feeling the uneven heartbeat of the city. Your boots crunch softly as you head toward a marketplace further down the road. The closer you get, the stronger the odours become. Fresh bread, damp straw tobacco smoke, fried fish, fresh flowers, and a hint of something vaguely rotten all blend into a strange morning perfume that you cannot quite categorise. It is both inviting and repelling, a reminder that Victorian streets never hide their reality. You weave between people moving with purpose. A maid hurries with a basket covered in cloth. A clerk swings a leather satchel as he walks briskly toward an office building. A ruddy-faced man carries a bulging sack of coal on his shoulder, leaving a trail of dark smudges behind him. You nod as he passes, and he nods back, both of you acknowledging that sometimes mornings feel heavier than they should. A newspaper boy darts past, slapping papers against his palm as he shouts the headlines. You cannot help noticing how thin he is, cheeks a little hollow. Childhood in the streets is its own education. Your path continues toward the city centre, the noise rising, the pace quickening. You feel the pulse of the streets growing stronger, inviting you deeper into the Victorian day. This world is grimy, loud, vibrant, and endlessly alive, and you cannot help but be swept along by its energy. The morning is only beginning, and already you sense the promise of movement, labour, and stories waiting in the hours ahead. You follow the growing hum of the morning until your stomach reminds you that curiosity is not breakfast. The ache is a low, persistent tug, the kind that becomes louder with every bakery you pass. Victorian mornings are built on fuel, even if the fuel is thin, simple, and barely enough to keep a tired body moving. You slow your pace as you make your way toward a cluster of working-class homes where the scent of something warm drifts through an open doorway. Inside one of the narrow kitchens, a woman stands over a small coal stove coaxing heat from a few glowing embers. You linger near the threshold, feeling the warmth radiate outward in gentle pulses. Victorian coal fires are small and temperamental, more like stubborn pets than obedient machines. You watch as she adjusts a metal grate with a practiced nudge. The flames respond slowly, flickering brighter, just long enough to boil a bit of water. You step into the space as quietly as possible. The kitchen is cramped but alive with activity. A kettle whistles faintly. A pot simmers with something that smells faintly of oats. A cat curls near the hearth, its fur dusted with soot. You sit at a rough wooden table, the surface scarred from years of chopping, scraping, and hurried meal preparation. Your fingers trace an old groove carved deep into the grain, probably made by a restless hand decades earlier. A mainstream historical fact surfaces as you glance around. For much of the Victorian era, a typical working-class breakfast often consisted of porridge, stale bread, and maybe a scrap of cheese if the week had been good. This simple fare is meant to sustain hours of labour, and you feel a wave of sympathy for anyone who tackled factory work on nothing more than oats and determination. The woman ladles a scoop of thick porridge into a chipped ceramic bowl. The surface glistens slightly, steam rising in delicate curls. You cradle the bowl between your palms, letting the heat seep into your fingers. You take a cautious spoonful. It tastes earthy and slightly smoky from the coal fire. It is not exciting, but it is warm and steadying. A quirky tidbit floats into your memory as you chew. Some Victorians believed that adding a splash of leftover tea to porridge improved digestion. You glance toward a teapot on the table and wonder if anyone here follows that odd tradition. A tiny part of you wants to try it, partly out of curiosity and partly because this era seems determined to prove that the stranger, the remedy, the more confident people were about it. You tear a piece of bread from the loaf beside you. It cracks loudly, the crust brittle from age. You dip it into the porridge to soften it. Even then, the bread puts up a fight against your teeth. You remind yourself that preservatives are far in the future, and that most families only buy what they can afford, stretching each ingredient as far as possible. A small boy slips into a chair next to you. He offers a shy nod, then attacks his bowl with the urgency of someone who knows he will be running errands as soon as he finishes. You notice a smear of coal dust on his cheek. Maybe he helps at a nearby workshop or carries deliveries through the winding streets. Childhood here is short, practical, and packed with responsibility. The kitchen fills with soft clinks of spoons and mugs. Despite the sparse food, there is a comforting rhythm to this scene. You feel it in the quiet exchanges between family members, in the habitual scraping of bowls, in the collective acceptance that this is simply how mornings begin. The hunger eases as you settle into the calm. After breakfast, the family shifts into movement. The woman wipes down the table with a damp cloth, her motions steady and unhurried. The boy pulls on a threadbare jacket. An older man sitting in the corner ties his boots with hands already blackened from yesterday's work. The coal dust never really washes away. It just moves from skin to cloth, from cloth to floor, from floor back into the air. As the family prepares to leave, you step outside into a small courtyard bordered by brick walls. A thin shaft of sunlight filters through the fog, touching the laundry lines above your head like a quiet blessing. You listen to the wind tugging at the clothes. A few droplets fall onto your sleeve, cold and sudden. You walk toward a communal pump at the centre of the yard. A man with broad shoulders works the handle, each pump producing a groaning squeal that echoes against the bricks. Water sloshes into his tin pail, splattering onto the ground and creating muddy puddles that swallow the tips of your boots. The pump is worn from constant use. You imagine how many hands have gripped that handle over the decades, forming a bond of shared necessity. You cup your hand under the flow, letting the cold water run across your fingers. It tastes metallic with a faint mineral tang. Clean enough, at least for today. You wipe your hands on your trousers and move on. Down a narrow lane, the smell of frying onions drifts from a street vendor's cart. You follow your nose and find a woman selling breakfast scraps, fried fish leftovers, warm potatoes and small wedges of bread coated with dripping fat. These are the unofficial breakfast of the working poor, cheap and filling. You buy a small potato slice still sizzling. The surface crackles between your teeth, the inside soft and comforting. An open scholarly debate comes to mind as you lean against an iron lamppost. Researchers continue to question whether Victorian working-class diets were consistently poor or simply inconsistent, shaped by region wages and seasonal availability. Some argue that many labourers received more varied nutrients than previously assumed, while others insist that widespread malnutrition was an unavoidable reality. Standing here tasting the simple foods available to you, it is difficult to imagine that anyone thrived without a struggle. A fish seller calls out from across the road. A chimney sweep hurries by with brushes strapped to his back, leaving a trail of soot flakes that drift through the air like strange black snow. A pair of women laugh as they exchange gossip near the pump. Children weave between adults carrying baskets nearly half their size. The morning has shifted fully into motion, every direction buzzing with purpose. You take another bite of the potato and watch the life around you unfold. Every sound, every smell, every movement speaks of labour resilience and the quiet persistence of ordinary people doing what they must to get through another day. The breakfast settles warmly in your stomach as you step back into the street, ready to follow the flow of workers heading toward factories, workshops, and the next part of your Victorian day. You join the flow of workers heading toward the industrial quarter, feeling the ground tremble faintly beneath your boots. The vibration grows stronger with each step, like an enormous heartbeat pulsing through the cobblestones. The fog thins just enough for you to see the outlines of tall brick factories, their chimneys stretching upward like grim monuments to progress. You draw closer, and the air shifts. It becomes warmer, thicker, and filled with a metallic tang that settles on your tongue. A foreman swings open a set of iron doors, and the noise pours out with the force of a physical shove. You stand at the threshold for a moment, letting your ears adjust. The machines roar and clatter, gears grinding against gears, belts whipping through the air, hammers striking metal in fast repeating rhythms. It feels like stepping into the chest cavity of some giant mechanical beast. Your lungs tighten slightly as if unsure they should trust the dense atmosphere. Inside, the factory glows with a dusty orange light from high windows streaked with grime. Workers move in coordinated chaos, their bodies weaving between looming machines. Shirts cling to backs dampened by steam and heat. You notice how quickly everyone settles into their roles like dancers who know every step, even if the choreography is exhausting. You weave carefully around a spinning frame, feeling the breeze from its whirling spindles brush your sleeve. One well-documented detail from the era comes to mind in textile mills like this one. Sound levels could reach astonishing volumes, often leaving workers partially deaf by middle age. You can already feel the pressure building against your eardrums. You find yourself instinctively shrinking your shoulders as if trying to shield your hearing from the relentless assault. You follow a young woman stationed at a loom, her fingers moving so fast they blur. She ties broken threads with practiced precision, never looking away from the trembling web in front of her. When she glances up for a brief second, her eyes are sharp and alert. You try shouting a greeting, but your voice dissolves into the noise. She gives a small, knowing smile before returning to her work. Conversation here is something people save for outside these walls. You step deeper into the mill, passing rows of machines vibrating so intensely the floor feels alive. Steam billows from metal pipes overhead, dripping condensation onto your hair. You wipe your forehead with your sleeve, realizing that your skin already carries a thin layer of lint and dust. Workers inhale this fluff all day, every day, and the thought makes your chest tighten. Some physicians of the time warned of respiratory dangers, though their warnings often went ignored. Near a corner workstation, a man guides a heavy piece of cloth through a set of rollers. His forearms are strong, darkened by constant exposure to oil and heat. He nods at you kindly, then gestures to a small metal cup on a nearby stool. You pick it up and sniff. The liquid smells faintly acrid. A tiny but strange piece of evidence from the period surfaces in your memory. Some workers use machine oil, as an improvised remedy for sore joints, rubbing it into their skin, despite knowing it was probably unhealthy. You set the cup down carefully, unsure whether to admire their inventiveness or worry for their health. A steam whistle screams overhead, nearly startling you off your feet. Workers barely flinch their bodies, accustomed to the constant shrieks that signal break times or shift changes. You watch as they move in slow waves toward the far end of the building, where a few cracked windows let in a sliver of cool air. You follow them, grateful for the brief reprieve. At the break area, workers unwrap small parcels of food. Bread with drippings, a bit of cold potato, a slice of cheese if fortune has been kind. You sit on an overturned crate and accept a small corner of bread from a man with soot smudged across his nose. The bread is dry and stiff, but friendly gestures taste better than the food itself. You chew slowly, grateful for the moment of stillness. Nearby, two men exchange a few gestures about the new machinery installed last month. There is ongoing discussion among experts even today about whether these innovations truly reduced workloads or merely increased expectations. Watching the men, you sense that the machines are both salvation and burden, giving them employment but demanding their stamina in return. You wander toward a metal foundry section of the complex where the heat intensifies dramatically. Workers shovel coal into a furnace whose glow pulses with fierce brilliance. Sparks burst out in tiny showers, dancing through the air before flickering into ash. You step back instinctively, feeling the sharp prickle of radiant heat on your face. A foreman raises a long rod, stirring molten metal in a crucible with a slow, deliberate movement. The liquid glows an impossible orange like captured sunset. You feel mesmerized and slightly terrified. According to surviving records, accidents in foundries were alarmingly common, with burns and crushed limbs considered an unfortunate but expected part of industrial life. You sneak another step backwards, suddenly far more aware of your own skin. You move into a quieter corridor where finished goods rest in neat stacks. Bolts of cloth metal, parts wooden crates stamped with shipping marks. The stillness here feels eerie after the overwhelming noise of the main floor. You run your hand across a stack of newly woven fabric. It feels warm, as if the cloth is still holding the memory of the machine's touch. A narrow staircase leads upward to a supervisor's catwalk. You climb carefully, gripping the railing, and when you reach the top, the entire factory unfolds beneath you. It looks like a vast mechanical landscape dotted with tiny moving figures. You feel both awe and unease. The labour of so many people flows into a single, unending rhythm, a reminder of how the Victorian era built its wealth on relentless human endurance. The whistle blows again, this time signalling the end of the morning shift. Workers rise from their stations with stiff movements, stretching their backs and wiping sweat from their brows. You descend the stairs and follow the flow toward the exit. The moment you step outside, the noise fades enough for your thoughts to regroup. You inhale deeply, even though the air is far from clean. At least it is cooler, softer, and free of cotton dust. You look back once more at the towering brick structure. Smoke drifts from its chimneys in heavy plumes, dissolving slowly into the sky. You cannot help but wonder how many lives are shaped within those walls, how many stories lie buried beneath the roar of machines, how many dreams survive inside that mechanical storm. Your legs feel slightly unsteady as you walk away, the echo of the factory still humming in your bones. The Victorian day continues to unfold, pulling you along its busy current as you step back into the street. You leave the industrial quarter behind, grateful for the sudden drop in noise as you walk farther from the factories. Each step feels lighter, as though the air loosens around you once the machinery fades into the distance. The city changes character block by block, and soon the soot-streaked brick gives way to cleaner facades, polished knockers and wide windows displaying lace curtains that look as though they never met a speck of dirt in their lives. You slow your pace, sensing the shift almost the way you feel temperature change. The smell of hot metal and coal dust dissolves into an aroma of polished wood, faint lavender water, and fresh pastry drifting from a well-kept bakery nearby. Carriages here move more slowly, their wheels smoother, their horses better groomed. Women glide along the pavements in tailored dresses, their skirts skimming lightly above the cobblestones. You notice how carefully their gloves fit, how precisely their hats are angled. Everything in this part of town expresses a determination to appear composed. You approach a townhouse whose brass handle gleams like a small sun. The door opens before you can knock. A middle-aged maid steps aside, gesturing with a courteous tilt of her head. Her uniform is spotless, her posture impeccable. You step inside and find yourself in a hallway so tidy it almost feels unreal compared to the chaos outside. The wallpaper glows with soft floral patterns. A clock ticks steadily on the wall, its sound delicate yet authoritative. You follow the maid into a drawing room with pastel walls and an intricately woven carpet. Sunlight pours through tall windows, illuminating porcelain figurines arranged on a mantelpiece with perfect symmetry. You move toward a small sofa upholstered in damask fabric and sink into its surprisingly firm cushion. This is the world of the Victorian middle class, polished and proper, built as much from etiquette as from brick and mortar. A hostess enters the room smiling warmly. Her gown rustles softly as she moves, and you sense the quiet pride she takes in maintaining an orderly household. According to contemporary diaries, many Victorian women of comfortable means spent enormous energy orchestrating the social rituals of the home, ensuring every tea-gathering visit and conversation followed the unwritten codes of polite society. She invites you to join her for afternoon tea. You accept, and soon a small tray arrives carrying a porcelain teapot decorated with delicate roses, a matching sugar bowl and a plate of small cakes dusted with powdered sugar. The maid pours the tea with steady hands, never spilling a drop. You notice how she keeps her gaze slightly lowered, a subtle reminder of the social distance built into every interaction here. You lift your teacup and inhale the fragrant steam. The tea is smooth mellow, a soothing contrast to the coarse brew you tasted earlier among the working class. A slice of sponge cake melts on your tongue with surprising tenderness. You lean back and let your shoulders relax. The stillness is luxurious, almost unreal. Your hostess begins to chat in a pleasant, unhurried voice. She speaks of weather of recent novels, of her cousin's new embroidery project. You listen politely, nodding when appropriate. Conversation here follows familiar rails, and stepping outside them would feel almost scandalous. A curious little fact from household guides comes to mind. Many etiquette manuals of the time offered very precise instructions for small talk, instructing readers on topics that were safe, risky, or downright forbidden. You glance at a framed watercolour on the wall depicting a peaceful garden scene. In this curated world, nature is something to admire from a distance, rather than to wrestle with directly. You wonder how often your hostess visits the countryside, or whether she prefers to enjoy it from the safety of artistry and imagination. You sip more tea and try not to appear too lost in your thoughts. On a nearby table sits a small silver tray holding calling cards. You pick one up and admire its elegant typography. In this era, calling cards operate like miniature passports to social circles. A well-documented aspect of Victorian etiquette is the ritual of leaving a card when visiting someone, signalling your presence politely, without forcing an unexpected interaction. You imagine the delicate dance of card exchanges, each gesture weighted with meaning that would mystify a visitor from another century. The maid re-enters with a fresh pot of hot water. As she pours, you notice her hands are slightly rough perhaps from long hours spent scrubbing floors and laundering linens. You wonder how she perceives the world she serves so faithfully. Her eyes flick briefly toward the window, then back to her duties. For her, this room is both workplace and stage. Your hostess begins describing her weekly routine. There is tea with neighbours, a charity sewing circle, visits from relatives, and occasional piano practice. Nothing sounds rushed, yet everything is structured. You sense that time in this house flows differently than in the factories you visited earlier, measured not by whistles and machinery, but by ritual and repetition. A tiny curiosity from the period drifts into your thoughts. Some middle-class households kept scrapbooks filled with clippings of etiquette, advice, moral instructions, and inspiring quotes. These were treasured not merely as collections, but as guides to maintaining dignity in a rapidly changing world. You imagine your hostess maintaining such a book with pride, As she continues speaking, you notice an intriguing tension. Her voice is calm, but her fingers tap lightly against her teacup, a small sign of restlessness. There is an enduring discussion among social historians about whether the strict etiquette of Victorian life offered women comforting structure or imposed suffocating limitations. Watching her, you sense the answer might be both tangled together in a way that defies simple labels. She offers you another slice of cake and you accept gladly. You let your gaze wander around the room. A writing desk sits in one corner with neatly arranged stationery. A piano stands polished and waiting near the far wall. Sheet music rests open on its stand. You approach quietly and note a gentle lullaby written in flowing script. The note suggests soft evenings filled with music and lamplight worlds, away from factory floors. Your hostess excuses herself, momentarily leaving you to explore the room. You examine a small bookshelf filled with popular novels of the time, Dickens' Gaskell Trollope. Their spines are worn from you, suggesting that literature provides a cherished escape here. You run your fingers over the embossed lettering and feel the slight rise of the print. You return to your seat just as the maid enters to refresh the fire. She crouches gracefully, using brass tools to coax flames from the smouldering embers. Sparks flicker upward in tiny golden trails. The warmth spreads through the room, comforting and inviting. When she finishes, she gives a small nod and departs as silently as she arrived. The hostess returns with a pamphlet in hand. She speaks about an upcoming lecture on moral improvement, something she attends regularly. Moral lectures are common in this era, shaping public conversation about propriety, social duty, and personal restraint. You listen politely, though you cannot help noticing the faint irony that so much effort goes into being well-mannered, while ignoring deeper social inequalities only a few streets away. You finish your tea and place your cup gently on its saucer. Your hostess smiles warmly and offers to show you the garden before you leave. You follow her through French doors that open onto a small, neatly maintained courtyard. Ivy climbs the walls. A stone bench sits beneath a blossoming rose trellis. It is peaceful quiet, a perfect sanctuary from the noise of the city. You inhale the scent of roses, letting the fragrance wash away the remnants of smoke and steam that still linger on your clothes. The garden feels like a world within a world, curated and delicate. Your hostess guides you back toward the front hall. She retrieves a calling card from a dish and hands it to you with a polite nod. You accept it, feeling its weight as both a token of welcome and an invitation into this cultivated sphere. Stepping outside again, you blink against the sudden brightness. The street glitters with afternoon light, and you feel yourself shifting once more, moving from the gentle structure of middle-class life back into the broader, messier rhythm of the Victorian city. The day continues to unfold, and you follow its pull, stepping away from polished parlours and toward the unseen work that keeps them running. You step away from the genteel street, letting the polished calm slip behind you like a silk ribbon released from your fingers. A narrow alley waits to the side, quieter shaded and humming with a different kind of energy. You follow it, feeling the shift happen gradually. The air cools, the scent of lavender water fades, and the walls close in. Soon you reach the back entrance of a large townhouse, a door far plainer than the gleaming one you used earlier. This is the route the servants use, the passage through which a household actually breathes. A young maid opens the door, wiping her hands on her apron as she steps aside to let you in. Her smile is warm but tired, the sort of expression carved into someone who works before dawn and ends long after most people have gone to bed. You enter quietly, as though stepping into a private realm. The kitchen stretches out before you, a bustling hive of heat movement and quiet hierarchies. Copper pots hang from a beam overhead, catching the firelight in soft reddish glows. The stove burns fiercely, radiating a kind of determined warmth that belongs not to comfort but to obligation. In the centre of the room stands the cook, sturdy and resolute, her sleeves rolled up as she chops vegetables with rhythmic efficiency. According to surviving household account books, cooks in well-staffed Victorian homes wielded immense practical authority, deciding menus, managing budgets, and ensuring the entire household ran on schedule. You watch her movements and sense that she commands the room without needing to raise her voice. A scullery maid hurries to the sink with an armful of dishes, her motions rushed and slightly frantic. She plunges them into steaming water, so hot you wince just watching her. The air fills with the smell of soap onions and simmering broth. Floors gleam from constant scrubbing, though you can still see faint traces of ash near the stove no matter how hard someone tries to banish them. The constant push toward cleanliness feels like a battle fought every hour. You settle onto a small wooden stool near the wall, careful to stay out of the way. Servants move around you in intricate patterns, barely speaking, yet always aware of one another's presence. This choreography is built on long practice and unspoken rules. One maid slips past with a tray of fresh bread. Another darts across the room with an armful of linens. A third pauses to refill a kettle, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. A lesser-known detail preserved in a few old servant manuals catches your attention. Some Victorian households required their staff to walk softly, avoiding any sound that might disturb their employers. You watch as a maid pads across the floor on quiet feet, even though her shoes are sturdy and worn. Her silence feels intentional, almost delicate. A footman enters from the hallway, straight-backed and immaculate in livery. He nods politely to you, then begins polishing the silverware laid out on a long table. The forks catch the light with eerie precision, each tine gleaming like a small pale flame. You realise that every object in a well-kept Victorian home passes through many hands tuned and polished by people whose names rarely appear in family records. Beside you, the kitchen door opens slightly and the butler emerges from the pantry. His presence shifts the atmosphere instantly. He moves with calm authority, carrying an inventory ledger tucked beneath one arm. His posture is straight, his expression measured, his voice low yet commanding. Many contemporary memoirs describe the butler as the quiet spine of the household, the one who keeps order whether the family notices or not. He surveys the room, then gives a nod of approval before returning to his duties. The servants relax by a fraction once he disappears again. You exhale slowly, feeling the same tension ease in your shoulders. A pot on the stove begins to bubble aggressively, sending up a plume of steam. The cook swats at it with a towel, muttering under her breath. You lean closer to see what she's preparing. A thick stew simmers within, rich with vegetables and broth. The smell fills the room with savoury comfort. While dinner upstairs later will appear polished and elegant, you suspect this hearty stew will feed the workers below. Kitchen leftovers often sustain servants who rarely tasted the refined dishes they prepared. A curious scrap from old letters comes to mind in some homes. Servants were forbidden to eat the same foods as the family except when leftovers were abundant. This rule varied depending on wealth and temperament, but the divide between upstairs and downstairs extended even to taste. You glance at the stew again and silently hope there will be plenty. A housemaid bursts through the door carrying a tangle of bedsheets. She spreads them across a table, inspecting for stains with practiced eyes. Laundry is relentless work here. Sheets boiled, scrubbed, wrung dry until arms ache. Towels beaten and shaken until clouds of lint float like powdery ghosts. Clothes ironed with heavy blocks heated directly on the stove. You feel a flutter of awe for the stamina required to repeat these tasks day after day. Near the staircase leading upward, a maid pauses with her duster. She hesitates as though debating whether to go upstairs immediately or wait for the footman to finish polishing the silver. There remains an enduring debate among domestic historians about how much autonomy servants possess despite rigid hierarchies. Watching her decide when to move, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Duty rules the structure, but experience shapes the flow. You follow her softly as she climbs the back stairs. The wood beneath your feet is worn smooth from generations of hurried footsteps. You reach the upper landing, a narrow corridor lit by a single oil lamp. This passage runs behind the grand rooms you visited earlier. Through a small crack beneath a door, you hear polite conversation drifting from the drawing room. Laughter, light and graceful, floats through the gap like a fragile perfume. The maid dusts a hallway table, dusting quickly but precisely. You watch her replace a small vase so perfectly that you cannot detect even a millimetre of change. Her movements are almost invisible, designed not to disturb anything or anyone. You realise how many people pass through these spaces unseen, maintaining the illusion of effortless elegance for the family above. In a linen closet, another maid folds napkins into neat triangles. Her fingertips move with surprising delicacy, as though handling small works of art. According to some inventories found in estate archives, wealthy Victorian homes owned hundreds of individual linens, all requiring washing, ironing, folding and storage. The task feels endless just looking at the stacks. A door opens down the hall and the butler reappears. He speaks softly to the footman outlining plans for the evening meal. They discuss timing, candle placement, serving order. Their conversation is quick, efficient, and completely focused on creating a seamless experience. You marvel at how much thought goes into each tiny detail that most guests never notice. You follow them back toward the main staircase. From this angle, you see how the spaces intersect elegant rooms on one side, functional corridors on the other, all woven together by the movements of people who rarely rest. The contrast is startling. It feels like watching two different worlds pressed together under one roof. Back in the kitchen, you find the staff preparing for their own brief meal. A bench near the wall serves as their dining area. The stew is ladled into bowls. The bread is coarse but warm. You accept a small portion when offered tasting gratitude more than flavour. The servants sit together, shoulders brushing, sharing quick glances and small smiles. Their laughter during these moments is soft, cautious, but genuine. A footman tells a quiet joke, earning a few muffled giggles. A kitchen maid wipes her brow with the back of her sleeve. The cook takes a long breath, savouring her single moment of rest. These fragments of connection sustain them through hours of physically demanding work. As you stand ready to leave, the servants begin clearing their dishes in practiced rhythm. The tranquility ends almost instantly. New tasks await. Fires must be tended, rooms checked, lamps, trimmed carpets, beaten tea prepared. Their world never stops moving. You step outside through the back door, taking one last look at the bustling interior. The faint warmth of the kitchen follows you out before the door swings shut. The alley feels cooler, quieter, and a little lonelier now that you have glimpsed the hidden machinery of a Victorian household. You walk toward the open street again, letting the door close behind you, carrying with you the hush and discipline of the people who keep the city's most refined homes alive. You follow the curve of the road until the city begins to loosen its grip. Stone buildings fall away, replaced by patches of green and the slow rolling rhythm of the countryside. The air shifts again, trading cold smoke for the gentler scent of wet soil and crushed grass. You breathe deeper without thinking, and the relief feels almost luxurious. Victorian life may be anchored in cities, but rural villages still hold the steady pulse of older rhythms. A dirt path winds ahead of you, bordered by hedgerows humming with insects. Birds call from somewhere above, their songs layered and bright. Your boots sink slightly into the soft earth with each step. Mud clings to the soles, unbothered by your attempts to shake it off. A wagon creaks past its wooden wheels, spinning lazily. The driver nods a greeting, his hat tipping forward in the breeze. You reach a small cluster of cottages with thatched roofs and low doors. Smoke curls from the chimneys in thin spirals, and the smell of burning peat drifts across the village like a memory. Children chase each other near a well, their laughter echoing across open fields. A dog trots behind them, tail wagging, fur matted from a morning romp through puddles. You approach the well and drop the bucket, hearing the soft splash far below. When you haul it back up, the water is cold, fresh, and faintly metallic. Rural families depend on wells like this for everything from drinking to washing. According to accounts left by agricultural workers of the day, some villages shared a single well for dozens of households, turning each morning into a small social gathering before chores. An older woman sweeps the stone threshold of her cottage. She glances up and gives you a smile lined with years of outdoor living. Her hands are rough from labour, her apron dusted with flour. She gestures for you to follow her inside, and you duck beneath the low door frame, stepping into a room thick with warmth from a peat fire. Inside the cottage is dim but cosy. Wooden beams cross above your head. A kettle hangs over the fire steam, curling upward in lazy tendrils. Dried herbs hang from the rafters, their scents mingling with the earthy smell of peat smoke. The woman stirs a pot of stew simmering at the hearth, and your stomach responds with an eager pang. She ladles a small portion into a wooden bowl and hands it to you with a nod. The stew is simple barley carrots, potatoes, maybe a scrap of meat if you're lucky. It tastes honest and grounding. You eat slowly, savouring each warm spoonful. In rural homes, meals often depend entirely on the season, the harvest, and luck. One firmly supported detail found in many village journals notes that winter diets were sometimes so sparse that families relied heavily on stored root vegetables, porridge, and whatever game could be hunted. A chicken wanders through the cottage doorway as though it owns the place. It pecks at a breadcrumb near your boot. The woman laughs softly and shoos it away with a broom, though not with much conviction. Animals roam freely here, blurring the line between indoors and out. You thank her and step back outside, blinking at the sudden brightness. The sky stretches wide across the fields, a pale blue canvas brushed with streaks of white cloud. You hear the distant thump of a farmer's boot on packed earth. Curious, you follow the sound until you reach a pasture fenced with wooden posts. A farmer leans on a pitchfork, watching a pair of oxen pull a plough through dark soil. He wipes his brow with a sleeve, leaving a streak of dirt across his forehead. He nods at you quietly. Conversation here is slow, deliberate, carved from necessity rather than formality. You stand beside him for a moment, watching the steady progress of the plough, cutting clean lines into the earth. A peculiar little remnant mentioned in farm logs comes to mind. Some rural families believe that leaving a small offering of grain at the edge of a newly tilled field brought good harvest luck. You find yourself scanning the fence post to see whether anyone left a small bundle tucked into the wood. The farmer motions toward a nearby barn. You walk with him, stepping around puddles left by last night's rain. Inside the barn, smells of hay animals and damp wood. Sunlight streams through gaps between the boards, creating golden stripes that dance with swirling dust. A cow shifts in its stall, lowing softly. Chickens cluck from a roost overhead. The farmer sharpens a tool on a whetstone, the steady scrape echoing through the barn. He explains little, but his motions reveal everything. Work here is constant. Animals must be fed, tools, repaired fences, mended fields, tended all in harmony with daylight and weather. Rural life may appear slower than the city, but the labour never ends. You step back outside and explore a narrow lane that winds between fields. Wildflowers bloom along the edges, brushing your clothes as the wind stirs them gently. You hear a faint buzzing overhead and glance up to see a man tending bees near a wooden hive. His hat drapes with protective netting. He lifts a frame coated with golden honeycomb, smiling with quiet pride. According to some agricultural records, beekeeping was both a practical trade and a cherished hobby, providing families with honey candles and a modest source of income. As you walk, a young girl carrying a basket trots past you. She hums a tune, her braids bouncing against her shoulders. You catch a glimpse of potatoes and a small jug inside the basket. She heads toward a neighbour's cottage, likely trading ingredients for something her own family needs. Rural communities rely on this kind of informal barter, a network of exchanges woven from trust and mutual support. Finally, you reach a small footbridge crossing a shallow stream. The water trickles over smooth stones, reflecting flashes of sky. You crouch and dip your fingers into the cool current. It runs clear, untouched by factory waste. Frogs cling to the muddy bank. A dragonfly skims across the surface like a tiny jewel. Standing on the bridge, you let the countryside settle around you. The quiet here feels restful in a way the city never allows. Yet beneath the serenity lies a constant tug of responsibilities shaped by soil seasons and the unpredictable nature of survival. Interpretations vary widely among scholars about whether rural Victorians led harsher or more wholesome lives than their urban counterparts. Watching the fields stretch into the distance, you suspect the truth sits somewhere between hardship and fulfillment. You turn back toward the lane as the sun shifts slightly overhead. The village settles into its afternoon rhythm, steady and unhurried. You take one last deep breath of clean air before beginning your return toward the road, ready to wander further into the Victorian day that waits just beyond the horizon. You leave the countryside behind and follow a winding road that slowly funnels you back toward tighter streets and the hum of daily purpose. The air grows heavier with the familiar smell of coal dust, but there is something else layered beneath it now, a sharper scent of chalk and ink that pulls you toward a low brick building near the edge of a modest neighbourhood. Children hurry past you in small clusters, clutching slates under their arms, boots clattering on the cobblestones. Their chatter blends into an excited buzz that guides you straight to the doorway of a Victorian schoolroom. You enter cautiously as though stepping into a memory of discipline. The room is long and narrow, lit by tall windows that let in pale afternoon light. Rows of wooden desks stretch from front to back, each desk scarred with the marks of restless hands. The air carries the chalky dryness of a place where lessons cling to every surface. You move toward an empty bench and sit on its hard plank shelf, feeling how little comfort plays a role in education here. At the front stands the schoolmaster, tall and stern, his dark coat hanging like a declaration of authority. He taps a brass-tipped pointer against the blackboard, sending a sharp click echoing across the room. Conversations die instantly. A hush settles so fast you feel your shoulders stiffen in sympathy. Teachers in this era command silence the way conductors lead an orchestra. One firmly established detail from educational reports of the time notes that discipline was considered as essential as literacy, and many classrooms prided themselves on order first, learning second. The schoolmaster writes something on the board in looping script. Chalk dust falls in tiny clouds each time he lifts his hand. The children copy the letters carefully onto their slates. You follow along, tracing the unfamiliar curves with your fingertip, imagining the weight of expectations pressing down on young shoulders. Some pupils sit with straight backs and focused expressions. Others fidget quietly, their eyes drifting toward the window where birds wheel lazily through the sky. A girl near the back struggles with her writing, her brow furrowed in concentration. The master approaches her with measured steps. You brace yourself instinctively, but he simply adjusts her hand on the slate, offering a brief nod of approval. His approach is firm, but not cruel. While some Victorian teachers gain notoriety for their harshness, others balance strict order with quiet mentorship. The variation depended as much on personality as on training. Behind you a boy coughs into his sleeve. His slate clatters softly as he resumes writing. Illness moves quickly in close quarters like these. The windows are cracked open for fresh air, but the room still feels close, thick with breath and the constant scraping of chalk. According to various diaries kept by students, the smell of ink, wool and dust became so familiar that many associated it with the very idea of learning. The lesson shifts. The schoolmaster calls on several children to recite multiplication tables. Their voices rise in tentative unison, stumbling only occasionally. The rhythm becomes a chant, steady and hypnotic. You find yourself murmuring along, drawn into the repetition. The master listens with a thoughtful expression, occasionally tapping his finger against his desk when someone falters. Near the front of the room sits a small cabinet filled with battered books. You approach it during a brief pause and run your eyes across the faded spines. Some are primers for reading and arithmetic. Others are moral instruction texts filled with stories about honesty, diligence, and the perils of idleness. A few contain simple tales meant to entertain, but also to shape character. One curious snippet preserved in old-school inventories notes that many classrooms owned only a handful of books, relying heavily on memorization and recitation rather than individual reading. A boy carrying an ink bottle bumps into your side lightly. He apologizes quickly, his cheeks turning pink. You notice ink stains on his fingers, tiny blue-black rivers that map his daily struggles with dip pens. The nibs scratch across paper as students practice their letters. Occasionally a blot blooms in the corner of a page, followed by a small groan of frustration. The schoolmaster claps his hands once. Everyone rises. A hymn begins, soft but earnest, filling the room with wavering harmony. You join in awkwardly at first, unsure of the tune, but the melody is simple and calming. Voices overlap imperfectly, creating an almost fragile beauty. When the final note drifts away, the master nods again, satisfied. Recess arrives. Children bolt into the yard with sudden burst of joy. You follow them outside into a square of trampled grass bordered by a low fence. The sky has brightened a little, and the air smells faintly of damp earth. Boys chase one another in wide loops. A group of girls hop a rope, their boots tapping a steady beat. Others form a cluster to trade marbles, their faces animated with fierce concentration. You sit on the fence, watching the energy unfold. Playtime is as important as lessons, even if not everyone in the era agreed. Interpretations differ among modern researchers about whether Victorian children enjoyed more freedom than often assumed, or if their days were so structured that play felt more like a brief escape than a natural part of life. Standing here, you sense both structure and spontaneity tugging at them. A girl approaches you shyly, showing a slate with a small drawing etched into the surface. It is a sketch of the schoolhouse, complete with tall windows and a crooked fence. You praise her quietly. Her smile widens and she darts back to her friends before you can say more. Her drawing lingers in your mind, a reminder that creativity lives even in rigid environments. The bell rings sharp and decisive. Children line up quickly, discipline settling back over them like a cloak. You join the line and re-enter the classroom. The afternoon lesson focuses on geography. The schoolmaster pointing to a large map nailed to the wall. He traces borders with his pointer, naming rivers and mountains in a solemn tone. The world seems impossibly vast from inside these walls, yet the children follow his gestures with curious eyes. Toward the end of the lesson, he speaks briefly about opportunity and industry, reminding the children that diligence leads to better futures. Whether or not those futures truly await them varies widely by class and circumstance, but the sentiment feels sincere. His voice softens just slightly as if he hopes his words might carry beyond today. The day ends with the same order in which it began. Children collect their slates, straighten their desks, and file out quietly. You follow them into the evening light, feeling the cool air on your face like a gift. As the school door closes behind you, the sounds of play fade, replaced once again by the noise of the street. The transition feels abrupt but fitting. Education here is both a doorway and a boundary shaping young minds, while reminding them of the world waiting just outside. You walk away slowly, letting the chalk dust settle from your clothes as you slip back into the growing current of the Victorian afternoon. You drift from the schoolyard with the late afternoon sun settling low behind rooftops, warming the pavements and stirring the streets into their busiest rhythm. The day has reached that lively hour when errands collide with leisure, when workers seek small comforts before the long evening ahead. Your feet guide you naturally toward the heart of local commerce, where shop fronts glow with lamplight and vendors arrange their goods with practiced flair. The first thing you notice is the blend of scents swirling together in the air. Warm bread, roasted chestnuts, canvas dyed with sharp chemicals, tobacco smoke, polished leather, and sweet spices all mingle to form a marketplace perfume you cannot categorize, but immediately recognize. People thread through the street in steady currents, each carrying baskets, parcels, or children who insist on touching everything within reach. You approach a bakery whose windows fog gently from the heat inside. The door opens with a small jingle. A rush of warmth envelops you, carrying the buttery smell of fresh buns cooling on metal racks. A young girl behind the counter smiles shyly as she arranges loaves with deliberate care. According to municipal trade reports kept during the era, small family bakeries like this often supplied entire neighbourhoods, their ovens working from before dawn until late in the evening to keep up with demand. You buy a small roll, pleasantly warm, the crust crisp beneath your fingers. As you step outside and take your first bite, the bread crackles softly, revealing a pillowy interior. It is a simple pleasure, yet precious in an age where many meals are built from necessity rather than indulgence. Next door, a grocer shouts prices in a voice that has likely weathered decades of bargaining. You wander inside, drawn by the colourful stacks of produce arranged in uneven rows. Apples blush red and gold. Carrots, still dusted with soil, lean against burlap sacks filled with dried peas. The grocer gestures proudly toward a crate of oranges, exotic treasures shipped from warmer climates. a peculiar little curiosity preserved in shipping ledgers notes that oranges were sometimes displayed as symbols of prosperity, even in modest shops where few could afford them. A woman beside you examines a cabbage with the focused precision of a jeweller appraising a gemstone. She nods in approval and slips it into her basket before bustling away. Children linger near a barrel filled with licorice twists, eyeing them with hungry longing. The grocer watches them closely, not unkindly, but with a keen understanding of temptation. As you continue down the street, the atmosphere brightens further. A bookseller opens a crate of newly arrived volumes, the covers smelling faintly of ink and glue. He flips through one and whistles softly as though congratulating the printer. You pause to browse a few titles. Some are novels printed cheaply on thin paper. Others are collections of poetry. A few pamphlets advocate social reform or moral improvement. One detail frequently mentioned in literacy studies of the century is that affordable printed materials expanded rapidly, allowing even working-class readers occasional access to literature. You slip a penny pamphlet into your pocket before moving on. The next stall surprises you with its splash of colour. A draper spreads bolts of fabric along a wooden counter, each length, shimmering with patterns that reflect every class of society. Some are sturdy wool blends meant for daily wear. Others are soft cotton florals destined for dresses that will grace Sunday church pews. He lifts one bolt to show you the weave. You trail your fingers across it, sensing the hours of craft embedded in each thread. Nearby, a spice seller grinds cinnamon with a stone mortar. The scent rises in warm clouds, wrapping around passers-by like a whispered invitation. You lean closer, breathing in the sweetness tinged with something deeper. The seller offers you a pinch to smell his eyes twinkling with pride. A minor but intriguing footnote in old trade accounts explains that spice merchants often relied on scent rather than display to attract customers, knowing the aroma alone could lure them in. You thank him and step aside as a mother with 2 children approaches, drawn by the smell. The younger child laughs with delight, nearly sneezing from the strong fragrance. The marketplace broadens as evening approaches. Gas lamps flicker to life one by one, bathing everything in warm golden light. The street becomes a ribbon of glowing windows and lively chatter. You pass a stall selling ribbons of every colour. Another displays tin toys that spin or rattle with cheerful energy. A young boy turns a small crank attached to a toy music box, grinning widely as a simple melody plays. You pause at a sweets vendor offering small luxuries for a single penny. Peppermint drops lemon pastilles, sugared almonds. You choose a lemon sweet, letting it dissolve slowly on your tongue until your mouth tingles. Small pleasures like this carry surprising power in a world where daily life demands so much endurance. As you linger, a pair of friends step up beside you, laughing loudly about the day's events. Their conversation drifts your way. One of them mentions new department stores rising in the wealthier part of town. Interpretations among economic historians differ on whether these stores democratize shopping or overshadowed small local businesses, but the impact on consumer culture was undeniable. Listening to the friends chatter excitedly, you sense how alluring the idea of a grand store must seem. You continue walking, weaving through the crowd. The sky dims to a soft lavender, and every window glows brighter in response. A butcher lifts a cleaver with practiced force, preparing the last cuts of the day. A cobbler leans over a workbench, hammering nails into a leather sole. A perfumer near the corner spritzes a mist of floral scent into the air, prompting curious glances from those passing by. You make your way toward a quieter stretch of street where small shops cluster together like old friends. A tailor sits on a stool outside his door, sewing a seam by lamplight. His needle flashes with rhythmic precision. He smiles as you approach and lifts a coat to show his handiwork. The stitches are clean and confident. According to notes left by travelling observers, tailors often doubled as informal confidants for customers. People shared news, gossip, and worries while being measured for garments. You sense a similar warmth in this man's presence, as though he is accustomed to listening while his hands remain busy. A bell rings faintly from a shop selling household goods. You enter and wander among shelves filled with candles, tin pans, wooden spoons, and simple soaps. The scent of lye and lavender blends oddly yet pleasantly. The shopkeeper nods in greeting, barely pausing his careful task of sorting nails into small drawers. As you leave, night begins to creep in fully. The marketplace vibrates with its last burst of energy. Children tug at parents' hands, begging for one final treat. Couples stroll slowly, fingers barely touching. Workers purchase small items that brighten the slog of long days. Everything feels immediate and human. You walk a little farther, taking in the final glow of the stalls. Your pockets hold crumbs of bread, the faint smell of lemon, sweet, and the softness of fabric lingering on your fingertips. Each sensation reminds you that consumer life in the Victorian era is a delicate blend of necessity, desire, and fleeting joy. When you finally step away from the marketplace, the golden lamps fade behind you and the street narrows again. The evening deepens and you feel the Victorian world shifting subtly as the day tips toward night. You walk slowly away from the marketplace, letting the last hints of lemon sweet dissolve on your tongue as the street narrows and quiets. Evening settles with a soft weight, dimming the edges of the city and drawing people into their homes. Yet not everyone retreats indoors. A few linger outside doorways or cluster at corners, wrapped in mufflers, trading murmured stories about friends, neighbours, and something far more delicate, courtship. You follow a narrow lane lit by gas lamps that flicker against the darkening sky. Their glow paints the brick walls in shifting warm tones, creating pockets of intimacy where shadows curl like secrets. It feels right that you find yourself here now, easing into the quieter world of Victorian romance, where longing often hides behind etiquette and expectations. Ahead, a young woman in a neatly pressed dress steps onto a small stoop. She glances up and down the street, fingers tightening around a folded note in her hand. Moments later, a man approaches with hesitant steps, pausing a respectful distance away. They exchange polite greetings, their voices soft. You can feel the space between them hum with anticipation. Courtship here is not a matter of impulse. It is ritual choreography, delicate like spun sugar. Parents often supervise neighbours, observe, and reputations can rise or fall over something as subtle as an improperly timed visit. Evidence from local etiquette booklets of the period shows that couples were expected to navigate a maze of unspoken rules, shaping every glance and gesture with purpose. The young woman hands the man her note, and he presents her with a calling card in return. The card glints in the lamplight, its edges crisp and clean. Calling cards act as tokens of interest, invitations wrapped in paper. You see now how essential these small objects are, carrying messages that must remain dignified even when emotions run deep. They speak a little longer before parting ways. She disappears inside, cheeks flushed, while he heads down the lane with the careful stride of someone replaying every word in his mind. You can almost feel his heartbeat echo in the quiet evening. You continue your walk, drawn toward a row of modest homes where another small scene unfolds. A girl sits near a parlour window, her hands knitting in steady, nervous patterns. She pauses whenever footsteps echo on the pavement. Each time the sound fades, she sighs and resumes stitching. Her anticipation feels almost fragile. Inside the parlour behind her, you see a chaperone seated in a high-back chair, quietly reading a newspaper. The presence is deliberate. According to many domestic journals, it was considered proper for a relative or trusted family friend to supervise visits between young people, reassuring everyone that decorum remained intact. Privacy as you know it is not part of early romance here. A faint tapping sounds at the window. The girl looks up sharply. A young man stands outside, lifting his hat politely. Her face brightens, though her posture remains carefully composed. The chaperone rises and opens the front door, greeting the visitor with a stiff nod. He enters, sits where directed, and engages in conversation that tiptoes around true feeling. They speak of weather books, gardens, trivial things that serve as stand-ins for affection. You watch from the doorway as they exchange soft smiles, their eyes holding deeper truths than their words allow. It is strangely endearing. One unexpected detail recorded in personal letters is that many Victorian couples later admitted their earliest romantic conversations felt like deciphering coded messages, each sentence layered with meaning known only to them. You step back outside, giving them space. The street feels different now, gentler, as though touched by something hopeful. A little farther down, a more affluent home draws your attention. Gas lamps illuminate manicured hedges and polished brass railings. Inside, a drawing room glows with candlelight. You peek in through a slightly parted curtain and see a woman seated at a piano, her fingers drifting across the keys in a soft, wandering melody. Nearby stands a suitor dressed impeccably, leaning against the mantel with measured elegance. Music is often a courtship language here. Sing a gentle tune, play with poise, and you reveal not only skill but temperament. Several surviving memoirs mention how music lessons were as much about preparing girls for social events as developing artistic talent. Watching the suitor listen with rapt attention, you understand how these small serenades deepen sentiment. The final notes drift into stillness. The woman glances up at him. Her expression is calm, but her hands tremble very slightly as she folds them in her lap. He bows his head, speaking with low sincerity. You sense an emotional thread stretching between them, taut and shimmering. Outside again, you cross paths with another pair, walking carefully along the pavement. They maintain a respectful gap between them as propriety demands, yet their shoulders lean ever so slightly toward one another. Every few steps, the man offers a comment that makes the woman smile, and she responds with small, quiet laughter. You catch only fragments of their conversation, but it is sweet in its restraint. Courtship is not easy for everyone. As you move toward a quieter corner, you notice a young man standing alone beneath a street lamp, turning a small bouquet of wildflowers nervously in his hands. His boots tap an anxious rhythm. When a door opens, he straightens instantly. A woman appears, her expression uncertain. They speak quietly, tentatively. You cannot hear the words, but you feel the tension of a relationship hovering between possibility and disappointment. Some researchers studying diaries from the era point out that romance was often laced with practical considerations. Social class, family expectations, economic prospects, health and reputation all shaped relationships. Feelings alone rarely determined a match. You sense that weight in the young couple's stiff posture and measured tone. They part without resolution, the woman retreating inside with slow steps. The man lingers in the street, crushing one flower accidentally. Eventually he walks away, shoulders heavy. You continue wandering, reflecting on the varied expressions of affection you have witnessed. Romance in Victorian times lives in the spaces between, expressed through glances, letters, chaperoned visits, small tokens, and the careful timing of walks. It is a world where emotion hides behind politeness, yet pulses fiercely beneath the surface. Ahead you pass a lamplit fence where someone carved initials into the softwood long ago. The edges have weathered into soft curves, suggesting a story forgotten by everyone except the tree and the night. Interpretations differ among social historians about whether such small acts of rebellion were common or rare. Looking at the initials, you suspect that love always finds a way to leave its mark. The evening deepens, street lamps flicker, windows darken one by one. The city settles into a quieter heartbeat as romance retreats into parlours, letters, and whispered hopes. You continue on, letting the shadows stretch gently around you, guiding you forward into the changing night. You walk deeper into the evening, letting the warmth of courtship shadows slip behind you. As the streets begin to narrow and twist, carrying you toward another reality entirely. The lamps grow fewer, the alleys tighten, the noise shifts from gentle conversation to something rougher, faster, and far more urgent. This is the world of the crowded Victorian tenements where families stack themselves, floor upon floor, in buildings that creak under the strain of too many lives. You step under a low archway and emerge into a cramped courtyard cluttered with lines of damp laundry, swaying softly in the rising night breeze. A pair of children dart past barefoot despite the cold cobblestones, their laughter sharp and bright as they play a game involving a battered tin can. A dog barks from an open window above you, then retreats into darkness with a faint growl. The air feels thicker here. It carries the scent of boiled cabbage, coal smoke, and something metallic you cannot quite place. You breathe in, slowly adjust.
Dear friends, if this story brought you even a little peace tonight, just imagine how many more relaxing bedtime stories are waiting for you on this channel. So, please like this video, share it with someone who also loves calm stories, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know whenever a new story is uploaded. And now, YouTube has introduced something new. It's called hype. By giving our channel a little hype, you can help us reach so many more people who need rest and relaxation. Your support truly means the world. Finally, let us know in the comments